Be wary, use those types of skills to know what your class is like and figure out what's supporting them best. If they're more energized after they did that, chances are you've got a lot of tactile learners and those types of things. Hopefully people are nodding, making eye contact back at you, doing notes, things like that that are telling you that they're engaged. So right now, I can tell that 3 out of the 4 of you are engaged. So I've got people paying attention to me. Rose was looking at the slides, and Tia was on her phone. That's okay.
It was a kid message, and my phone is on silent, so I wasn't trying to interrupt the class.
By the way, I don't get people for doing that in a normal class because you got people in these classes, especially this one, they're volunteers. They got families, they got things going. So I never ding people unless they're being. But that was a little learning point. So Tia, thank you for letting me have that learning point. So we talked about this a little bit. You need to combine and you need to deal with all of these types of learners. Do a combination. Don't focus on one type of teaching. You might be more comfortable with visual, or you may be more comfortable with demonstrating, not quite as good with auditory, but remember we've got to keep in mind and accommodate all of those types of learning. So remember that as you're delivering these classes. So this one sums it up pretty well, and Charlie, just the exact type of visual you were just talking about. So we've got our CERT class. So how do we retain learning? We hear it, we see it. So we have a verbal lecture. We see it on the PowerPoint, we see a demonstration. We can say it. You know, Charlie, what gear do we need for a fire extinguisher operation? Charlie says, you need gloves, you need goggles, you need vest, you need helmet. So we can repeat that back. Then we do it. We do our practical, and we focus a lot on that. What's that last one? Teach others. The absolute best way to learn is to have to teach it back. Yep. You guys are going to know your units back and forth because I'm making you teach it back on Saturday to Huck and I, right? It's kind of a joke a little bit. I smile when I say it, but it really, really is. It's true. And if you have to be up there and you have to teach it, you're going to know it. Questions on that? Makes sense, right? It seems pretty basic.
That teach back, a lot of times, it's effective to have people pair up afterwards and one review to the other, and vice versa.
Yeah. And actually, this curriculum is designed for you actually to do this in pairs, and we modified it just because of our small number. But that's how it's done. If you go out to the Emergency Management Institute, that's actually how those teach-backs are done. They're always done in pairs. And they try and teach you teamwork and some of the other skills as instructors when you do that. One of the interesting things, I don't agree with that as much. I believe it, but I actually think that's an advanced skill. So let me go back to Jenny's question yesterday. So when I described my not very good teaching experience in Seward, and you asked, Huck, why didn't you take over? So
not very diplomatic.
Well, you know, fine. It's a perfectly valid question, and Huck and I have taught enough. You know, we're pretty much in sync. We know how to do that. So now let's say this was Huck's first time teaching with me, and he went to take over. How am I going to react? Not well, right? I don't know who is this guy who's trying to take over and some of those different types of things. Those are the thoughts that go through your head. So to get to team teaching, you have to know each other. You usually got to have some experience. You know, there's a lot more nuance that goes with that. Because Huck could have done it. I probably wouldn't have been happy, but I would have said, you know, Huck probably knows best because he and I have worked together. When you teach classes, if any of you ever go and do teach classes for the Emergency Management Institute, you bid it. So you oftentimes are stuck with instructors you've never worked with before. You meet them an hour before your class when you're all coming into prep. Sometimes you can tell. And one of the ways they do that is typically I teach Unit 1, Huck teaches Unit 2. I teach Unit 3, Jim teaches Unit 4. There's not much team within the unit because that's a very natural, I mean, you're not ready for that. So that's why we call that kind of an advanced skill and why we don't do it here. But I would actually encourage In CERT, I encourage it. And that's something we've kind of gotten away from as we kind of, again, like we talked about yesterday, we put the onus on kind of one person, but you can get another person there to help you. A lot of times, especially if you've got a bigger class, if Huck's teaching, I'll come in just to help run the activities. So for instance, when we're doing triage and we split the group up into 2 parts, Huck will be in here getting the folks set up how he wants them. I'll be out there helping the team that's about to go in. All right, who's going to be your team leader? Do you have all your gear? So see how well and easy that works? It's very smooth, and it saves class time. Because otherwise, Huck would have to set everything up here, go out there, make sure they're ready, bring them in, and another set of eyes to give feedback is important. So we'll talk about that as we get into some of those units. We touched on this a little bit yesterday. Do you have a preferred style that you like to teach? You probably do. Be careful about focusing too much on that. You got to put yourself out there as an instructor a little bit. The instructor guide, your IG, contains all of those elements and different things to accommodate that. Just be real wary of that and make sure that you're accommodating all of those learning styles. So create a positive learning environment. So what do you think about that when I say create a positive learning environment?
Adequate lighting, and not a lot of noise.
Okay,
That's
so your physical environment, all right. What else?
Have your stuff ready to rock.
And I think your graphics are appealing, you know, and yeah, okay, we're gonna see something on the screen.
Okay.
A clean environment.
Clean, so the classroom itself, you mean?
Dirty, cluttered, it's distracting.
Okay. Is my backdrop here very distracting?
A little.
A little bit? Absolutely it is. Yeah. What else?
You want to be on time. You want to start on time.
Yeah, Tom.
Get a reputation for it.
Yep. And you're right on that. And you will notice that as you notice at the crack of 6 o'clock, I started talking immediately. And that's just, again, and I suggest those things, it's being respectful of other folks' time. In the first unit, first class night, I usually will give 5 minutes. But every time after that, and we say that, we're going to start on time and end on time. And that's a message to your students that we respect your time. We appreciate you being here, and we respect that. So there's 3 factors. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, you know, you have people coming in from all walks of life. You know, somebody can come in, just had a major problem or something like that. You have to be kind of cognizant of your audience. If you see somebody that's a little stressed out or whatever, you want to make it nice for that person.
Well, Tina shared with her story today.
And you laughed at me. That was traumatizing. You made fun of me.
Sorry.
That was not the emotional support I thought I'd get from my friend.
I was using that as a teaching tool. Now you know what not to do. Jenny, did you have a comment?
Well, I was just, I hear you saying that you need to be flexible too, flexible to the learning styles of your students, flexible to different things that happen, flexible to situations that are going on, so that you have to be confident enough in your teaching that you adjust and change things all the time.
Yes, absolutely. And you're going to be able to judge that based on your class. And if you're coming in as a unit instructor, one of the things I highly suggest you do is you talk to the lead instructor, find out what the makeup of your class is. So here's a for instance that required us to be flexible. In the aftermath of the Funny River fire, we got a huge interest in this because this was the first big disaster emergency that had happened here quite a few years in the Central Peninsula. And I had people knocking down the door to take a CERT class, so I pushed one in the summer, which we usually don't do. And folks came in, and I've got, all of a sudden, older folks, folks that are retired, folks that have property, and then all of a sudden I've got high school kids, kids that got drugged here by their parents taking the class. So just think about the age range now. Do you talk differently to somebody that's 50 years old than to an 18-year-old?
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting question. Sometimes you do. But did I use a whole bunch more different examples than I usually did? Some that I tried to make more relevant to younger folks? Absolutely. And they're still relevant to older folks, but you know, I might have chosen this story instead of that story. So that's kind of an example of being flexible as well. So let's look at these 3 factors. What's a physically comfortable learning environment? We talked about a few things. Good lights, maybe not clutter. What else?
Not too cold, not too hot.
Okay, a good temperature.
Comfortable seats?
Comfortable seats. How you doing on those seats today?
Not
Hard.
good.
These are seats that I joke that say make sure you stay awake in them. Hopefully I'll get you seats. Okay, what else?
Thanks for the coffee and the tea.
Okay, so refreshments. Yep.
I have
That-
to see driving elements too. I mean, you kind of, oh, it's gonna be a late, slick drive home. You start thinking of that physical
Yeah.
factor.
Absolutely. Getting to the classroom, where the class is located. We try to put them in good areas. You'll find a lot of them here are here because it's easy, and that's more of a staffing issue than anything else. But especially when we go to other communities, we're trying to pick a community center or something that's somewhat centrally located. So yeah, that's absolutely a factor. What else do you think? Can you think of anybody else? Anything else? Yes,
Well,
no?
you have marker boards, paper marker boards.
Mhm.
And there's options for like, when a group gets into partners or small groups or whatever, we're gonna do an activity. And now it's like, okay, what am I gonna do with the equipment?
You got places to be. Physically, of course, these tables configure however you want them, so they're good for group activities. We have many of our classes are actually all centered around groups. This one isn't, but we do that quite a bit.
Arrangement of the room.
Yeah. So some of the other things that we can talk about, do you have some place to go? So in some of our facilities, you maybe just have the room that you're teaching in. Huck has taught classes in village halls and things like that, where you're kind of just in a central area, and you might not have a place to kind of get away from the classroom during a break, where you also might have some distractions. Huck has taught in the middle of the tribal center where the business is being done, and so random people are walking in and distractions and some of those different types of things. What else physically? And Tia was kind of touching on it before, what it takes to get here, the driving. What's something else that just kind of affects the physical factor a little bit?
Time?
Time. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. What time of day is your class? How many people are a little tired right now? It's nearly 7 o'clock. I've had a full day. How about you? So do we make some allowances for that? Do we understand that our folks are volunteering and some of those things? And it's a very different thing when you're teaching volunteers. I said yesterday that the quality of instruction should not diminish just because we're teaching volunteers. It's got to still be top notch. But if I'm in some of my other classes where I've got a professional audience or people that are working for me or advanced level practitioners, would I make as many allowances for I'm tired? Oh, I might make more allowances for the cell phones and the radios because they're working and doing different things. But it's a little bit different expectation style, so you've got to kind of adjust your expectations to that. So did we talk about most of these? People can see and hear the instructor. That's a big one we didn't talk about. So sight lines. Jenny, you kind of talked about that a little bit on how the room was arranged. So that's a big thing.
And I was thinking that I am really comfortable to have a stool to sit on my music stand,
Mhm.
my book, my place in front of the orchestra.
Yep.
So I'm thinking about that, if I would, I feel like I'm gonna need to have something in my hands, so.
Okay.
To have my music stand nearby, to have my book on.
I'm standing behind a lectern, and I still have this in my hand because it's how I teach, right? So similar thing. Let's take a quick question on that for the class, though. How do you feel about sitting in front of your students? What do you think?
Yeah.
Rose is okay with it.
Yeah, because sometimes my back hurts, so.
What does the rest of the group
I
think?
feel like you blend in.
You blend in, okay. Other thoughts?
Well, my stool's high,
Yeah, high,
I
okay.
taught with using that high stool.
And I have a broken hip, so I'm like you are. There's times when it hurts to stand for a long period of time, so I tend to have a stool or a chair. I don't stay in it, but I move around and get up and get down and I'm not very still, but I do sit in front of my class. But it's a physical thing, not necessarily.
And I think you're going to hear most folks say, don't sit. I also personally don't always follow that. And I sometimes make a little bit of a joke about it, especially if I've been on my feet all day and then it's time for class. I might kind of ask the class, all right, do you mind if I sit down because I'm hurting? And there's no reason to say, oh, I've got a bad hip, I've got a bad back, whatever. But just keep the sight lines in mind. If you go to a methods of instruction class or something like that, they're going to tell you don't sit down. But we're a little bit more flexible than that. Lighting and amplification for people with reduced vision, reduced hearing. This is one I've had students ask for the instructor guide or the student manual in advance because they use a machine to help them read it. That's a potential combination. But we talked about good lighting, but folks that have some sort of vision problem, that has to be taken care of. Taking regular breaks, and we talked about flexibility. Breaks, by the way, we typically do the 10-minute rule for every hour, 50 minutes of instruction, 10 minutes of break, which means we're coming up on that, but let's finish these two things and then we'll take a break. Again, adjust that based on your time. So it's built into your class time. So in a typical 3-hour class, you're losing 30 minutes, right? So that's, again, time management. So now you have 2.5 hours of instructional time. It's kind of like the radio show with the commercials or the TV show. The hour-long television show is 44 minutes long. Same concept of actual content. Emotional factors. So look at some of those up there. Do we all like to be treated like adults or like peers? Yep. You want to allow people as much as possible to be self-motivated. And this is probably something you may have run into from time to time. Think about those learning styles things. So maybe I like to, we've gotten our gear and I've set up here, all right, now make sure you get out your goggles, your vest, your helmet, and your gloves because we're going to go and we're going to do X, Y, Z activity. And you're kind of like, well, what's this whole thing about? I want to go through this kit and look at these different things and see what they are. And somebody goes, no, we don't need that right now. We just need the, and people cut you off. And that's not letting you be self-motivated. We're adults here, even the teenagers, so the minimum age for this course is 13, so you could have a few younger people, but you want to treat them like adults and like peers in just the same way that you would treat anybody else. They want to know that they're doing things right. We talked about that, encourage, or at least that they're trying. So that emotional validation, to see a reason for them being here and for them to feel accepted. And this is something that you're going to find in CERT classes quite a bit because you're going to get some people in here that maybe have physical limitations. They may have emotional limitations or intellectual. You may or may not ever know about any of these. They need to know that they're trying. They need to feel confident that there's a place for them here. So this especially starts coming up when we start doing medical and search and rescue, some more of the physical things, and you have somebody that maybe can't do some of those things. What do we not do? We're not going to go, well, you go sit over there until we're done. Right? Mm-hmm. Would you do that? What would you have them do instead? We're going to do search and rescue.
They could videotape it, they could write about it, they could keep track of.
So they can do documentation.
Be a runner.
Be a runner, yep. What else?
It could be in the medical section,
okay.
The holding section.
So let's say we're doing our search and rescue. So we're doing cribbing right now. What could somebody that maybe can't bend over and move around so easily do?
Help gather supplies.
Might help gather supplies and being logistics, if they can lift buckets and things. Can they be safety?
Mm-hmm.
It's good to have one person just observing.
Okay.
For safety.
Can, if that's somebody that can move around a bit to see from the different angles, absolutely. You'd be safe to keep an eye out and give them some information about some of those things. They empower them. You can stop this. You're the safety officer, so you can do some of those different types of things. How can you respond to emotional needs? We talked about some of those emotional factors. What do you think? How do we accommodate the emotional side? I want to be validated. I want to know that I'm doing good. What would you do as an instructor? Let's take a look at some of these. Being a resource for learning, respecting folks, explaining the benefits of some of these things and having those folks discover them. Not embarrassing people. Reinforcement, peer feedback. Making learning non-threatening. What did I say when we came in? This is a safe room. You might hear safe room, no fault learning environment. It's okay to make mistakes. I told you guys about the worst instructor experience I've ever had. That made me look bad, didn't it? Is that what any of you thought? Be honest. Did you think of me negatively, or did you respect me for telling you that?
I have the highest respect.
Yeah. Because you're not a divine entity up here.
You owned up to
You're a
it.
peer. You are a teammate. You're a partner. You may know this right now, but you're teaching it to your students. And so you want to create that bond. Because what did I do when I told you that? I created an amazing environment of trust right then with just that story. And it's not being manipulative, but that's exactly what I did. We're going to be honest. It is okay sometimes to say, you know what, it took me 3 or 4 tries to learn how to do the fire suppression unit when I went through the class. Is that okay? Absolutely.
Well, honestly.
Thanks, Huck.
Honestly, it made me relieved because if you're already the trainer for trainers and you've done all kinds of classes and you admitted that, hey, it was a bad situation, I was tired, and even though I got all this experience, it wasn't a good day. We all have not good days, I know that, but it made me relieved. Oh, thank goodness.
Right.
Not so much pressure.
And he's human after all.
And that's, that's a good one. But remember that. So remember how you felt. Because all of you came in here yesterday and you were very apprehensive. You were. I know you were. I can tell. This is a new, 17. This was a new thing. That's how your students feel. They're very nervous. Some of them think that you're going to try and turn them into firefighters and paramedics and doing heavy rescue and putting ropes over the building, what they see in action movies, right? Being a peer, teach to their level. But you're not embarrassing people. You don't go now, no, this is how you do it. Little Johnny, right? We don't do that. We re-explain it. We use different words. And we're going to talk some more of those techniques as we go.
I was thinking, have you had the experience that something triggered in a student and they became really emotional, maybe they started crying and had to leave, and then when you took a break, did you speak to that person and make sure it was okay to continue? And
It's happened. In CERT, there's usually 2 trigger points. One is in Unit 1, if you ask people if they've ever been through a disaster before. That could be a trigger point. If people raise their hands, and typically what I'll do is, do you wish to share with the group? The other one is Unit 7, which is disaster psychology. A lot of times that will trigger some severe experiences they've had, and typically the chaplains will kind of give a little preface, a warning for that. But oftentimes, I haven't had it so much in CERT where I've had to go and perhaps check on somebody. I can kind of keep an eye on them. Hopefully, if you've got some sight lines or you see when they come back, if they're doing all right. If they just need to go collect themselves, hit the restroom, that's fine. I've actually had that happen in. It wasn't even a class. It was an exercise. It was a full-scale exercise we were doing, and I was playing the incident commander, and an individual was not doing well and was mad and snapping at people and walking out. And things weren't going that poorly, and I talked to her the next day. I let her just kind of sleep on it. Can anybody guess what the problem was?
PTSD or something?
It wasn't PTSD.
Lack of sleep.
No,
Hungry.
she was trying to quit smoking. Shouldn't try and quit smoking on a disaster day, right? Should schedule that better. But could that happen? Could you have somebody trying to quit smoking or something like that, or be having a situation at home, family, emotional?
I get miserably snappy in a hot room. I can't do the heat. Makes me really irritable for whatever reason.
And that goes back to that physical thing again. We try and make it comfortable for folks. Intellectual factors. So physical and emotional fine, but they have intellectual. They want to be able to share their experiences. We talked about war stories yesterday. They want to connect what you're telling them to something they already know. They want to be involved, and they want to learn the way they want to learn. They don't want to be forced into, I'm going to lecture you, even though you are a kinesthetic learner. Okay? So how can you respond to these types of needs, intellectual needs now? Any ideas?
Let people share their stories.
I'm sorry?
Let people share their stories.
Let people share their
Sometimes people
stories?
learn by being able to relate to it.
And it might bring them down, and not necessarily de-stress isn't the right word, but it'll let them feel involved in the class. That is a potential way, but you got to watch that one pretty closely. 'Cause some people just feed off that and it will continue. Any other thoughts?
Just like you were saying earlier, try to make it relevant, what you're teaching, relevant to, for in our example, the Kenai Peninsula. Make it relevant to the lives that we're living.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's look at what the book says. Using learners' experience to introduce concepts. This is where you want to pay attention to those introductions on day one. Did anybody notice what I was doing when you guys introduced yourselves yesterday?
You taking notes?
I was.
Yeah, me too.
Why?
I want to know who's here. I remember who's here when I write it.
I know most of you. I know
She
your
gave us her thingies based off of her weakness.
Yes, I did.
Okay, that's right.
That's when I assigned your teach backs while you were talking. Because, yeah, I did exactly that. If you told me you were weak in something, you got it assigned you. You're welcome. But seriously, if you are that type of person that likes to take notes and that helps you, jot something down. I will typically be wandering up front and trying to be near people as they're talking, so I'm going to go Tia, and then I'll go down the list. Charlie, you want to talk about yourself, or introduce yourself. But if you're somebody who likes to take notes, or if you've got somebody else in the room, they might like to jot down a few things, because things might be relevant if they have some experience doing this or that, or something that they mentioned. Building bridges between different types of information. Active learning, and again, a variety of learning styles comes up again. You'll notice the theme in this particular unit as we keep talking about it. Especially here, if people are bored, they're going to leave. If people aren't finding value, they're going to leave your class. You're not going to see them again. And you're going to wonder why you lost them. You're going to lose people. Statistically, usually you lose, on an average CERT class, 1 to 3 people from beginning to end. For whatever reason. Time commitments, something happened, emergency, fill in the blank. And those are all things that you can't do much about. But you've got to make an active, comfortable, engaging, rewarding, emotionally, intellectually, class environment. How have I been doing so far on that? Are you guys learning? Are you interested in this? Are you bored?
No, yes. No, not
Ah,
bored.
you're bored, okay.
No, not bored, but enjoying it, really.
Yeah. And how do I know that? Because I can see all of you, and you are all pretty much engaged. And the more time you spend up here, of course, our classroom teachers probably know this very well. You're going to see whether you're making an impact. And you can make adjustments on the fly if there was something. I had a meeting here as a briefing that I was giving about an event we're doing actually next week. And I had one person that was just disgusted, and he was kind of shaking his head and trying to figure that out. He was not happy with what I was saying, and he wasn't really understanding it. But you got to keep an eye out for those folks and figure out, depending on the context, but in the CERT class, figure out if there are people doing that. Because if you've got somebody doing that all night, their needs aren't being met, find out why. You can go up to them casually, hey, how are you doing? Are you enjoying it? Do you have any suggestions? You can do those types of things at breaks, subtly. But you'll know. You'll know as instructors. You're up here, you can see everybody. We're a little overdue for a break. Let's take a 10-minute break.